In 1940, I was a fifth grader, and so I had attended a private school, and then we all had to go to a public school, and which was fine, but it was funny to watch how some teachers reacted. We had a geography teacher, and on that particular day, they expected some commissars from the new regime to attend classes and see how the teachers interacted and how they taught. So we were sitting in this geography class, and the teacher was singing praises to the beautiful landscape in Siberia, the taiga and the wonderful forests, and it was so lyrical, it was so beautiful, and he was halfway through the lesson when the commissars walked in. Without missing a beat, he started the same spiel all over again. So we got a double dose of that. And then, of course, we had some pressure to join the communist youth organizations. And I did not. And the schoolmates called me a traitor. Well, so it was. And then, of course, we had all kinds of assemblies. And on one side of the stage, there was a granite bust of Lenin. On the other side, there was a granite bust of Stalin. And I was somewhat of a little hooligan, because I took a blowgun and I made took some piece of paper away, and I shot the face of Lenin full of little white dots, and I shot the face of Stalin full of little dots, and well, obviously somebody had been watching, and of course there was, again, some bigwigs were coming in to address us and regale us with stories about the glories of the Soviet Union, how great their life was there, and how miserably we had lived in Estonia and that sort of thing. And so they came into this assembly hall and saw those busts of those communist saints with white dots, and they found out it was me, and they said, "Well, we're going to send you into a juvenile institution," but they did not. So I had many brushes like that. I was not a very docile child. During this German occupation, everybody was supposed to work, and even, well, especially young people were put to work, and I had to work on a farm. And in the process of making hay, I got stuck with a pitchfork, and I developed a very serious infection, and that practically crippled me because there was no penicillin or anything like this. And so I wound up in a hospital, and then in August, this hospital was evacuated about 15 kilometers out of town, and then after a few days, the Soviet tanks were coming in, and we were evacuated back into the city, which was incredible. I was sitting on top of a truck, not sitting, I was lying, but I was just looking at this. It was like a river. I mean, there were people with horses, with their cattle and what have you, and the whole highway was like a river of humanity. So everybody was fleeing. And then we wound up in a schoolhouse because a truck broke down, and I was in such great pain, and I was, just making a lot of noise, and I got on the nerves of some people, most of them anyway. So one man came with a fifth of vodka and forced it down my throat. I was 14 years old, and I was force-fed practically a quarter of vodka. And I went just completely cold. The next morning I just completely cold. And my mother was really, she was just incredible. She organized for us to get to a railroad station. And I was on a stretcher on the floor in that railroad station. It was full of soldiers. There was mud on the floor, and I was there practically dead. And so anyway, a German physician was there and said, "Well, what are you trying to do? And, this boy is not. He can't be transported. And he's too far gone." And he was, again, with a rank of captain, he was the head of a German first aid station. But the front had yet reached that area, so it was just setting it up in a schoolhouse. And he put me in a German military ambulance, took me to that first aid station, did some procedures, extracted a lot of pus, from my knee, about, 300 cc's, and it was really awful. And he kept me there for 2 days. And until he said, "Well, now maybe you can last the trip from that place to Tallinn," which was the capital city and the port. And so we got the last train out of Tartu. There were not many civilians on it, mostly wounded from the field hospitals, and this was also in cattle cars. So all the wounded, and me included, were laid out in stretchers. And now, of course, the civilians came on board as well. And then that was the last train out of Tartu to Tallinn. And then we were offloaded, and the stretchers were on the platform, lined up, long row of stretchers. And who comes by is the commander of the German field hospital. And his field hospital had been evacuated to Tallinn. They took over a former orphanage. And so comes and he says, "Ago, what are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I'm very sick." So he put me in a German field hospital. And I was there for about 3 weeks. And they operated on me, and they did all kinds of good things. And I remember one day, it was September 15th. This was when, after the Finns made a separate peace with the Soviet Union, the Germans thought they could occupy a Finnish island to keep the Russian or the Soviet Navy blocked from entering the Baltic Sea. But the Finns honored the peace treaty, and they foiled the German little invasion. And then all of a sudden, there was an influx of German wounded into the hospital. And there were 3 operating tables. I was on one, and there was 3 others that were operating on young German soldiers, 18 years old, 19. And they had been hit, with shrapnel from mortars, and the inners, cuts were lifted up from his stomach, and the physicians were picking up shrapnel. I mean, it was a horrible sight. It made me a pacifist. This was a horrible sight. So anyway, I was in that hospital until Tallinn was going to be overrun, and Dr. Fosbeck, he was the officer who had been quartered in our house. He said, "Well, I can get you on a boat to Germany, but what happens afterwards, I have no control over it." And so my mother and my grandmother also got to Tallinn, or stayed there, and said, "Well, it's up to you." They said to me, "Should we flee Estonia or take our chances here?" Well, by that time, I was almost 15. I figured, well, we were going to be deported or worse back in 1940. It's not going to be any better in 1945. And going into the civilian hospital at that time, all the doctors, I'm sure, had fled. There were no medicines. So I said, well, we might as well take our chances, get on that boat. The American troops came in, and the tanks and what have you, and there was a battle. Not much of a battle, really, because the Germans were really running away at that point, and it was a turkey shoot, basically. The American troops were just shooting at fleeing Germans. My grandmother was really upset. She said, "Look, there's this Pentagon, this star, She said, don't worry about it. That's the white one. It's not the red one." And then they were hunting. They were hunting Nazis, and someone had snitched on a man who worked on that in that electric plant. Of course, I was there helping out as well. And I was, at this point, I was at the window, and a jeep drives up, and there's this machine gun in the middle, and they turn the machine gun on me, and one soldier jumps on a bench with a carbine. "Hey, you, come down." So I went down, and they asked, "We're looking for a man named Schmidt." I said, "Well, Schmidt lives right there." And then Schmidt was taking a nap on his couch. They took this fellow Schmidt and said, "You're a party member?" Yeah, I'm a party member." "Do you have a pistol?" Yes, I have a pistol hidden." They put this Schmidt on the hood of the Jeep, drove a couple of clicks, and shot him. At that time, Germany was in rubble. It was just a heap of rubble. The Germans didn't have jobs. Food was scarce. There was really no future in Germany. And Germany took off in the early 50s. There were some resettlement efforts. You had opportunities to go and dig coal in Belgium, or go to Australia and work in the sugarcane fields, or build railroads. There was Canada. There was a lot of building dams, timbering, and that sort of thing. And so a lot of people went to Canada. A lot of people went to Australia. And my stepfather's neighbor in Estonia had emigrated to the United States in the 1920s. And this gentleman became our sponsor. And so we came here in 1949, Easter Sunday, landed in Boston. We were greeted by wonderful ladies from the American Red Cross who had wonderful hats. You remember Carmen Miranda, the Brazilian bombshell? Well, all those hats were Carmen Miranda style hats. Bananas, tangerines, plums, cherries, oranges. It's wonderful Easter Sunday finery. My grandmother looked at them and she burst out laughing, and she was just flabbergasted. I had never seen anything like this. And this photographer from the Boston Globe took a snapshot, and the picture appeared in the Globe. GP de Leers were happy to land in the United States. We were interviewed by the local paper, and they put a caption on it, "They like it over here," which we did.